Yeah, I think if this was if Dom and I had a massive fan base and audience who loved us and not just loved Dom because everyone loves Dom, but if they loved what we do here, this would be like maybe a 3 hour long form thing because that's what I love. Dom would probably hate it. And also, we're going to put out four hour long albums. Dom next. No, so
No, but
I think
nobody cares. Let's just do it anyway. Let's just do it anyway. It's fine. It's all good.
I love long form. I really, really do. So don't feel as well like if you want to talk about something for ages, go for it. And if I keep talking for too long, just tell me to shut up. Anyway, so obviously, I'm not going to introduce you in depth because you know who you are and what you do and what you're doing at the moment and how you see yourself in far more detail. So please, the only media question, tell us who you are and what you do. Like,
man, that's a bit esoteric for me. It's morning. No, it's not really morning, but I am a recording engineer, composer, and record producer. And obviously my name is Kallie. So yeah, those are the three hats that I wear frequently.
And I mean, we had, obviously, Dom has a historic relationship with you professionally, and I have with Mary and the Ram. I had the opportunity to get to know you as a producer, and you worked on one of our tracks, which was Eclipse a couple of years ago. Doesn't feel like a couple of years ago. It feels like last summer, but every summer has been a postponement of the next summer for the last 2 years where we haven't been able to do anything. But so that was the capacity in which I met you, and that was a really interesting process working with you as someone that steered a track, but not from a technical production perspective, but from a creative production perspective. And that was a really refreshing way to work, and it produced results that I hadn't had outside of my other world that I live and work in stuff that goes on stage that isn't music, where I do work with dramaturgs and people like that all the time. It's really pleasant working with you like that. Is that a format that when you work with other people, is that the role that you sort of position yourself into predominantly, the tinkering with the concepts and the structures, as opposed to writing music with other people, or where do you see yourself as a musician? Because obviously I know you've got bands and you make music as well. What sits up front for you?
Well, it really depends on the nature of the project and the nature of where the band or artist are at when I, first get brought on. So I usually, if I have my preference, like I could talk about, my preferences, but first and foremost, it's really about where the artists are at in their process and their journey and what they're really needing. And I think sometimes a good analogy is that, in my mind, a producer is kind of like a personal trainer. Like they're there to find out what your goals are and help you get to them. And sometimes people aren't even really clear about that yet. But if I have my druthers, and the preferred way to work is that I like to get in early when they're at the sort of demo stage, and talk about creative references, but also technical references. So like what types of sounds they like on records and what kind of record they think they aim to make. And then I'd like to work with them from their demos to kind of talk about arrangements, like directions that they would be open to taking the arrangement into or not. And then we look at the budget and kind of what studio could we go to, what can they afford? And we look at, what would be the best fit for a mixing engineer, what would be the best fit for a mastering engineer. So I really like to think of it as a soup to nuts experience where they're getting a concierge level of guidance through some of the structural things of making a record, but then they also have a technical advisor, a creative advisor who is going to make sure, if I'm there personally, which I didn't get to record with you guys physically, that the studio that's picked is going to best suit the sound that is trying to be achieved. I'm looking at the mic list and working with the engineer at the studio to figure out our best method of attack on the day. I like to get there early in the morning, the day of recording, and really go over, how we're miking, whatever we're miking that day, and and then guide each of the takes. And kind of when it gets to the mix level, like I usually step back because I like, whoever at that point, then it's on to that next phase. But some artists I've worked with want me more involved in the mix phase. So if the mix engineer is open to it, I'll attend the mix session, as long as that's not going to slow them down, because I obviously have a lot of respect for their own, workflow and comfortability with that. But, there's a lot of times where I will liaise between the artist or the band and the mix engineer types of notes, or, give a little couple ideas on the mix if, again, both parties are wanting that kind of feedback. So, and I've even had artists where I've had attended mastering sessions where I've gone with the artist to the mastering session. I had an artist early on, I guess in 2010, and we mastered with Fred Kevorkian. And so we went, and sat with him, and we did, 2 different masters, because we knew that obviously streaming in 2010 was already a very prevalent thing, but we made sure that there was a streaming master and a CD master. So it really just depends. Some people, I've been in the case of, I'm forgetting names and this is bad. One of the projects that I worked on, maybe it's better if there's not names. I was more of like an executive producer, which is a fuzzy term anyway these days, but they came to me at the post-production level where they'd already recorded everything and they'd self-produced a lot. And they just said, we're stuck and we seem to be, we're mixing it ourselves and we're chasing our tails and we're not getting it. Can you just make sure that this project gets finished? So in that case, I found them the right mixing engineer and mastering engineer. And I worked with the mixing engineer in a sort of artist liaison way where, I was passing notes back and forth and attended some of the mixes in person, which was a really lovely experience for everybody. I can only speak for myself, but I really enjoyed that project. So yeah, so I don't know if that's as clear as mud.
No, it's interesting. So rather than continuing down the route of asking you about your practice and where you come from, because I think we'll come back to it. You talked briefly about streaming in 2010, which is funny to think. I think I was, I can't remember when I started streaming music and stopped downloading music or buying CDs. I don't know where the exact shifts were, but for instance, these days I so rarely buy a CD, even though I should do. Like I buy CDs from bands actually, from bands directly. And when you're at a gig or something, if people have merch and they want to flog it, and it's but then I know really for me that's more about the upholding the culture of exchange with the band, same as 90% of the time I'll buy an expensive t-shirt that costs very little to make rather than buy the CD, and I'll go listen to the music online and download the music. And if they've got a Bandcamp, you can buy the music obviously directly, and that's nice as a medium. For you, having been in the industry throughout a period of transition, especially into the world of streaming, and looking at things like the digital rights of musicians and so on and so forth, where do you see things now, and where do you see things going in terms of your own personal experience? What are your I think everyone has a lot of negative feelings about it, and some people have some really positive feelings. But what are your thoughts on the direction?
I think we're in a really challenging place as not just as streaming as a technology, because I don't think it's the technology's fault. It's like any other tool. It's about the application. And I think that sometimes humans, when we're given a new tool, it's that old saying, when you have a hammer, everything's a nail. And I think that there's some of that's been going on. But moreover, I'll touch briefly on and say that in a sort of negative way, that I feel very strongly about what some of the American corporations are doing and the large record labels are doing in lobbying groups in Congress to stop the royalties that artists can be paid from streaming from being raised. And they have joined forces with other business entities to form the MLC. And these types of proceedings will impact artists globally, not just American artists, but artists globally. So that is a big concern to myself. It's something that I do think about, and that it does keep me awake at night, because I see too often from the production and recording standpoint that a lot of artists can't afford to make records, which I completely empathize with, because I can't afford to make them either. And that could be a separate topic about how budget constraints, I think, often shape the type of music that's being made today. Is that a problem? Well, it's a creative problem. And I think creative people are used to pivoting. And I think they're very good at making art no matter what. So that's fine. But I would hate to see the music industry get to a point where there's lots of types of music that will no longer be able to be made because artists have no ability to afford to make them. And I think that streaming plays a role in this. And we could argue that touring and t-shirts are the best way forward, but you cannot write and tour constantly, endlessly. You have to be human. You have to have time off the road to write and to record, unless there's like some tour bus studios, which could be fun. I'm not saying no to certain avenues. It's just that I don't want artists to be limited in their options. And I think that we're starting to get to an interesting place that is either limiting psychologically or limiting financially or limiting systematically. And I think that that is a struggle. On the plus side, I think that streaming is wonderful in the way that people can self-release. The means of distribution are wide open. Never before could you just put something out, this way 30 years ago. It was very much not this way. And that's not to say that I don't also have some gripes where I think that something that the music industry is severely lacking right now are tastemakers. And we've had them in the past and they still exist, but I think that they aren't as pivotably placed as they once were. And I think that tastemakers are valid for a reason. They're a mild, I would say gatekeeper is the wrong word. Authenticator maybe is another word. I'm lacking the term that I want, but they have a purpose. And I think that there's a beautiful relationship in what some of the tastemakers in the past have done, whether they're hosting a podcast or a radio show, is to kind of tell consumers about new music, not to necessarily tell them what to listen to, because I think consumers are, they're overwhelmed with content, but it does help them highlight and sift through what is coming down the pipeline if they trust that tastemaker. And I think it's great for artists to have relationships with tastemakers, to sort of have that bar to set, because otherwise it becomes like a land grab where everyone's really thirsty for the same corner of the block. And I think that can be frustrating as an artist too. And I've had some conversations with artists recently about like, oh, well, I've made this single and I'm going to just put it on Spotify, and that's kind of the end of it. And it's like, that's kind of exciting, but sad, really. Like, that's all that's going to happen to your single. You hope that 100 people stream it and you maybe make 50 cents. I mean, what are we fighting for? So I think there's a lot going on right now with streaming. And I guess on a final note, there is the inquiry that's being done in Great Britain, England right now. That's fantastic. My hope is that will move the dial. My fear is that because it's American corporations that it won't. But I'm eagerly, hopefully awaiting developments. And lastly, I would say there are good streaming companies doing fantastic things, like Resonate Cooperative is amongst one of them, very dear to my heart, and Bandcamp as well continue to really carry the banner in a lot of creative ways. So I think it's more about convincing people to step away from like the buffet of junk food, or as I like to call it, the poison pacifier. Like, there's no need to keep feeding ourselves junk food when there's really healthy ways to do what we need to do.
I think within that, I think for me, I'm always at a constant sort of tension within an attention economy of not, I really don't resent the amount of access that I have to things. And I also find myself feeling that maybe I should resent the algorithmic serving of stuff to me that I know, well, I don't know I'm going to like it, but the algorithm knows that it's going to appeal. And I want to resent it because it ties into a lot of broader socio-political things that I'm uncomfortable with.
I don't know. I'm just going to cut in here, and then I'm going to let you take back, Kiran, because stuff you're talking about with regards to the tastemakers and in regards to the machine and the wider machine of the industry and how it can influence us. I think we're forgetting that there is the tastemakers, they do exist, and we can pay for that. Like Kiran, you and I have dealt with press people who've promoted our music, but that's because you and I both have other forms of income that can afford to pay for those things. So so basically what Kallie was saying, tastemakers do exist, but they're paid too, and they're paid by certain people to say certain things. Now I can, I believe we make quality music. I believe the stuff you've done has been great, and obviously Kallie does, but and I believe Kallie's stuff is good, and that's why we're here spotlighting Kallie. But I think that we can afford to do that. We can afford to pay some press agent to tell the world that we are the new cool thing in post-punk or industrial music or whatever the genre, and we can chuck Kallie's name in there so that Kallie shows up on a bunch of news articles with us. And I guess going back to what Kallie was saying, it's about, it is an attention economy, and you have to pay. I love that phrase. I love that phrase. You have to pay to get people's attention now, and it takes away from the bands that can't afford that, and the bands that don't have an external form of income. There are some wonderful bands that have nothing, that have never had anything, that do American tours off their own backs and do all kinds of stuff. There's a band called Bull in York, who you might know, who've done all that, and they're now signed to EMI based on the fact that they're super young. They're super young, and that's what they're super young and super talented, scrappy indie dudes, and it works for them, and it's their image, and that's why they're successful, because they've caught a wave of popular sort of slacker 90s grunge type stuff. And I'm going to revert it back now so that you can continue. I think that before we start going, the machine controls us all, and it's all the corporations are at fault. Absolutely, I get it. But we wouldn't be sitting here talking to Kallie if we didn't have the resources to pay Kallie and Howie Weinberg and whoever else we've worked with, and then also pay a press agent to then go, hey, Mary and the Ram have worked with Howie Weinberg and Dave Ogilvy and Kallie Marie. And so, and that is a problem in itself, is the industry is, and I sounds fair, I perpetuate that. People call me a tastemaker, but then I pick what is sent to me by people that are paid by labels to send that stuff to me. So it's an interesting one, and it relates more to Kallie's point, but I'll let you continue on.
Yeah, no. I mean, that's a really astute expression, I feel, of the dilemma, the other side of the dilemma. So, I was saying that for me, I want to resent it, but then because of the framework, the technological framework within which it exists, of the access to all this stuff. Yes, there's an attention economy, but also there's so much stuff now that I would never have experienced, because I have 6 nights a week that I can go out if I put one night aside to not go out, and I'm not going out 6 nights a week to see bands. And I wouldn't have been going out 6 nights a week to see bands in the 90s. And I would have gone and seen the bands that my friends from my local area saw, or that someone told me to go and see. I would have never found some little band from Austria, until they'd already got bigger, but now I can. So, and this is the weird tension between
curation. think curation is the word. It really is.
Yeah, it's this mixture of access to so much stuff, and then which is just beyond anything that any generation before, as whatever generation we're in, anyone in this conversation, we're all the similar kind of generation, I suppose. But people around now, we have access to so much stuff, we have less time, but the system that is there, whilst it has its problems, also provides that network. And I think, Dom, you know, this idea of the fact that there are people inside those systems, and those they may be machinic, but they include people who you can go and talk to and have conversations with. The bigger issue within it you touched on, which is almost the class issue of, but you have to buy the time.
I think that's where some of the streaming services have the ability to create neighborhoods and communities and provide curation without monetization. I think that Bandcamp have a lot of featured artists. They have their own blog. I think they're doing a really cool thing by having these blogs and, you know, things like that on their page so that they can highlight people from the, you know, the Bandcamp world. And I think, you know, Resonate do something similar, but in a different way. They don't necessarily have a blog. I know that there's a lot of things that they're working on, but I know that they have like featured, you know, artist posts, and they now have a Resonate staff playlist. So I think things like that they're free curation. And I think that Spotify has been introducing some other ideas about artists having to pay more. And I really, we dealt with payola in the 80s, and I really don't think we need to go back that direction. And I do understand that depending on the type of tastemaker and what it's aligned with, you know, like if it's, say, MTV back in the days, you probably had a press agent and you had to pay people to get through those gates. To get to something like that. And that's understandable because there's production costs with that. But with some of these streaming services, I understand their businesses and they have their own costs. But at the same time, I think there should be a better symbiosis for which, you know, we're creating more community and more curation that isn't necessarily tied to money, because that just gets real tricky real fast and not good for artists and not good for the art either. Like
there are tools. There's something that came out a couple of years ago called Submit Hub, which is was set up by a very prominent blogger in the US. But basically, what happens is artists can pay the equivalent of like 50p in UK money to submit their songs to hundreds of blogs. Of course, that adds up over time. So if you're doing that to 10, 20 blogs, but it cuts out the middleman and it is focused less on money. So instead of paying 150 to 300 pounds a month to a PR company, which is typical, I mean, London based, you'll be paying more than that, but you can just submit your song. Now, I've done that with a couple of bands and they actually had more results from that than I have by paying the bigger money for PR companies. So I think there's something in that, and I would encourage people like yourself, Kallie, to kind of to have a look at that, because it might be something more akin to what your interests are with regards to kind of independent and DIY musicians who can only afford, you know, maybe $10-20. That can actually go pretty far, so long as you know who you want to reach. Like if you would perhaps pitch to more electronic, synthwave, I don't know, there's loads, there's absolutely hundreds on this platform, and that way you can get playlisted, because a lot of these companies, UK based, Russia, all over the world, these companies are, and they are Spotify curators, tastemakers. So actually, if you go on our, I mean, we've never had a world beating amount of Spotify listeners, but we've had more than we ever have done, because we've been playlisted on certain playlists through this platform. So, you know, when we re-released all our stuff about a month ago now, everything we've ever done came out on Spotify, and we got playlisted a bunch of times. Now, I know you and I have had I don't anticipate a big problem with us slagging off any big major company a podcast of our level, but you know, I know you and I have had conversations and disagreements, mild disagreements about. I appreciate what you say about Spotify, and I absolutely get it in terms of artists and the sort of Spotify takes a lot from the artist, but equally there's a lot to be said for and I don't know, I think I know what Kieran's going to say, but I wouldn't presume to know exactly. But there's a lot to be said for exposure and a lot to be said for what the amount of plays you can get on platforms like that can give you in terms of opportunities. Bandcamp, I believe, is its own powerhouse and stands on its own as an ethical and brilliant product in the music industry. That more people should take advantage of instead of just going straight to Spotify. But the nature of it is, because Spotify have the marketing budgets, etc., it has become the place to go. And if you have over 1K, 2K, 3K streams, it's an aesthetic thing. And this is, I'm gonna shut up now and leave you with this point to talk about. It's the aesthetic that is what is where Spotify appeals, and where over Bandcamp and the aesthetic of having actual counters. Now, I hate counters. I hate knowing how many streams somebody has, because it automatically goes, oh well, they're obviously not that popular or whatever. But if you do get on the right side of that model, where you have 50k streams, 100k streams, etc., it looks good. You get more. You get major label recognition potentially off the back of that. So I understand why it succeeds. At our level, I don't necessarily agree with it, because we're not getting that. And maybe if we were getting 200k streams a month, I'd be sitting here with my Spotify t-shirt on. I don't know, but I understand why the appeal is there, because aesthetics is the music industry. It's all about perception. It's all about perception. It's all about how good you look aesthetically, which is why Kiran is the front and center of everything Mary and the Ram does. And it's all about how you look. And I wonder, as I pause, I wonder where you guys stand on that.
I will briefly say that I agree. As put my user hat on, rather than my person that puts music on Spotify, because all of the listens to Mary and the Ram on Spotify are definitely not me. But yeah, so as someone that uses it as a listener more than someone that puts music out on platforms, just because I listen to music all the time like everybody else, I would honestly say my reason for going to Spotify 90% of the time is actually the functionality of the app, which is an annoying, and the app doesn't work great either, but it works better than Bandcamp's app, which is really annoying because Bandcamp's got the better product for what I want, but their app doesn't work in the way that I want it to. So it's little things like that I think, like, functionality is a big deal for me, and it's the same reason that I use Facebook Messenger. Why do we use Facebook Messenger? Why are we not talking on someone else? But it's functionality, and then it's network effect, I think, of the other people that use it because of functionality. And although Spotify, that doesn't apply, because I'm not communicating with other users. It's not a community thing. Same reason, why do I use Reddit? I use Reddit because Reddit has a network of people that are there who I want to talk to. If they were on something else, I would probably talk to them on something else and not Reddit. But so that's an interesting, slightly different way of looking at it from a user's perspective. But broadly speaking, I agree with that. Kallie, what are your thoughts and feelings? It's a difficult topic. It's nuanced, right? So
yeah. Oh gosh, on which piece of all of those?
More on what Dom was saying, I suppose. I think mine was just kind of me griping about Bandcamp's app. I just want it to be as fluid as Spotify.
That's a valid thing that the market should know, because honestly, like, I don't use Spotify. I've never used it. I don't have an account. I don't put my music there apart from explosives for Her Majesty. So I have no visibility into how their apps work. But I think that, maybe if if Bandcamp hears that people would be more inclined to use them more if they had a better app, that's important market knowledge. But yeah, to your question to me, I'm like, which bit did you want me to speak on? Because there's so much between the two of you there. I'm just a bit like, I think
the aesthetic side of it. I think because
the aesthetic side of it.
Yeah, this is another big topic that I wanted to cover with you. Now I've got to be careful how I frame this. You see, Kallie. You see, now you're an excellent producer, and your work is celebrated, in DIY indie circles in New York, and obviously we've worked with you for a particular reason. and people know you. People like you. You know, you can count Martin Atkins.
I hope.
You know, David Ogilvy as people that have either worked with you or interested in what you have to say, for example. So there's obviously a reputation there. Now, you and I have talked about aesthetics a number of times, not just here. To what level do you think aesthetics matters, taking into account some of the experiences, both negative and positive, we talked about in your background, how people perceive you in the music industry? How important do you think aesthetics is to be successful in music? Because not everybody can have your hair and Kieran's jawline. So, you know, so how do you look at aesthetics in the music industry?
So when I think of aesthetics, the first thing I think about is really like visual elements that are maybe less person based and more like the artwork and the stylization and how the artist or the band chooses to communicate themselves visually, which is interesting because I think that's a very modern marriage of senses, because I think that there were periods in music where people just made music for just listening to, and then we got into a later period of art music where people were like, this is the fawn or this is the springtime, and you had to imagine the things happening when you were listening to the music. But that was like a relatively new thing to do. And, you know, fast forward to where we are now, and it's like, well, is this the kind of music that has lasers? Or, you know, is this the kind of music that's just got like fog or no fog? We're just going to be ourselves, and there's not going to be any fancy elements, maybe some lights, you know. So and that's just live, you know. I think there's a certain aesthetic that starts there, and I think that often carries on to things like band photos and music videos, and, you know, people's perception of meeting people or you know, doing interviews and doing chats and being seen. And I think that adds a different element of authenticity. And I think it's interesting, you see, I think it depends on the persona of the artist. I think it depends on the overall, you know, it's different. It's difficult when you have a band because you have 5 people or 4 people or 3 people or maybe more people or maybe less. You guys have 2 people. So, you know, that becomes interesting because you're trying to explain visually, aesthetically, who the amalgamation is or are creatively of more than one person. So I think it's a lot simpler, maybe in some cases, to aesthetically express yourself if you're a solo artist or you're an artist that's maybe faceless. Like, I think it's very interesting what Daft Punk did over the years. I think Kiss had done something interesting, you know, by choosing to wear makeup to make themselves less, you know, I don't know what their original intent was, but it obviously walking down the street, they're less noticeable as themselves because people recognize the makeup, not the people as much. You know, and there's artists that I really enjoy, and I wouldn't know if they were sat next to me, like Aphex Twin, for example, or a Montauban. Like, I don't really have an idea of what they look like, you know, and I'm sure there is evidence of it somewhere, but their face isn't the face of their music. There's something else stylistically and aesthetically that I am more familiar with. And it's also a product, it could just be me and the time and era that we live in. But I think when we were all younger and there was more maybe MTV, I was more aware of what certain people looked like if they were getting play and there were music videos where maybe their face was featured or maybe their face wasn't featured. Maybe it was a very artistic video, but there might be MTV awards, or there might be an interview. And perhaps I was more focused on print media at that time. And I would avidly read every interview with every artist that I could get my hands on because it was hard to. And there was no internet for me to even know, you know, famously, I remember reading, this is like a story that I tell frequently these days, just to comment on how times have changed. I read the liner notes religiously of every record that I got my hands on, and I'd seen that Sylvia Massey had produced this Tool record, and I thought to myself, that's a really strange name for a man, Sylvia, because I had no way of seeing her, and you never saw women's names in that role. So, you know, it wasn't until much later that somebody was like, oh, you're like that Sylvia chick. And I was like, huh? And they're like, oh, yeah. So, you know, now it's very easy to see the aesthetics in somebody's social media, like how it's branded and put together, or whether it's not put together very well. Maybe that tells me that they're still under construction, or maybe they don't put that thing as being very important. But it all ties together. And I think aesthetically, it was really up to the artist, because there's so many other things that you can use as aesthetic tools these days. Like Björk did a really interesting thing, you know, creating an app around her album. And like that in and of itself is like it speaks volumes about what she's interested in and how she wants to engage her art audience aesthetically. And she goes very deep into, you know, her aesthetic presentation. So I don't know if that answered anybody's question, but it's a big piece of pie.
It is a big piece of pie. And I think my last sort of question, aside from the sort of media prompt question at the end, where we get you to promote all of the fancy stuff you're doing, it'd be, you know, can you tell me about some of the sort of, again, sort of on that line of aesthetics, as a female producer, you know, people would say we live in 2021 now. These, you know, it's a great time to be a producer who's female or non-binary, for example, or you know, whatever background or ability. And I just wanted to get your perspective on, do you think things have changed? Because you've told me over the years that you've had some positive experiences, but also some very negative experiences as well, with regards to the music industry and how you are perceived based on your looks or based on your ability, again, positively and negatively. So can you tell me, have things changed in a positive way? Obviously you can't represent women as a whole, but from your perspective, have things changed for the better, or are things still the same as it was when you first began your career up until this point?
So a couple of things, and that's a very tricky question. And I think, you know, I don't have a crystal ball. And I think that what is more pressing to my mind right now is, yes, I've seen change, but change is not permanent. And I think that is the most important thing that anybody in whatever activism you're involved in, or whatever part or place in society you are in, is that change is not solidified to be permanent. And we see this throughout history. And in fact, it's kind of the very basis of Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale, which, you know, we kind of exchanged tweets about, which was that backwards and forwards throughout history, women gain and lose status, rights, etc. So where do I see it now, and do I think it's changed? Some for the better, some not for the better. A lot of it is sort of the same but different, and that's not a tangible answer. That's like Jello to a wall. But what I have seen that's positive is that there's a lot of agency because of social media. There's a lot of camaraderie because of social media. I wouldn't have found 2% Rising at the beginning of the pandemic if it hadn't been for social media. And it's wonderful because the connections, the support, those types of things, did that exist in 1996 or 7? It might have in a very different way, but it would have been harder for me to access. And I certainly wouldn't have been able to be incommunicado with people in London and Berlin and New Orleans and all these places all at once, where we could all get together and meet and discuss ways to help each other and ways to uplift each other. So that's been a fantastic positive change. And I think that because there's more visibility, it is so positive because there are more allies like yourselves who have awareness and who care. And I think that more people are having more self-awareness about the issues that exist. And I think that goes across the board. We have to look at all the different issues that are intersectional through music. If our Black artists being treated fairly, our trans artists being treated fairly, our disabled artists being treated fairly, and how do we create systems that support each other, because no one person is just one thing. Everybody is a bits of few things. So it's really important to keep in mind that, like, the change is happening. My concern is that it stays put, because oftentimes there's a backlash. And so maybe I'm a bit of a worrywart, but my focus is always a cart or two ahead of the horse. And that I'm looking ahead going, well, this is marching forward. What's the backlash? What's the backlash going to be? And, I think that there's an educational component to it too. A lot of how I approach, feminism and activism comes from an academic background. Actually, I nearly did my master's at York University in women's studies. So, not to say that people have to have that background, but it's just, as a side note, interesting to me when I see people maybe take up the mantle because they've seen a hashtag and their passion's in the right place, but sometimes they do a disservice to the communities that they're in or themselves because they fully don't understand all the components. And I think it's important that people keep educating and talking and reading and learning, so that we can keep building better. And that hopefully whatever we build is going to be robust, because there are a lot of angry people. And I've had some angry incidents where, men have shouted and left meetings simply because some young women from South America had the chutzpah to challenge that they should be able to wear tank tops during the summer in South America while they're working in a recording studio, because it's hot. So there's a lot of work to still be done. And I think any egalitarian society, or society that aims to be egalitarian and democratic, always has its work cut out for it, because those things can never rest on their laurels. There's no way to just sit back and be like, oh, we've achieved peak us. Get way, thank goodness that's over. It's always going to be hopefully not a battle, but a constant effort to be evolving. I guess that's my answer.
Yeah, it's comprehensive. I think that you right at the end of that, you made me think something that worries me a lot of the time, as someone who's pretty broadly progressive across a wide range of the spectrum of things that you can have opinions on. So it's something that bothers me quite a lot, is when institutions that champion progressive agenda or agendas either rest on laurels, or more often, I think this is just because I'm cynical about it, I would see it in this light, but more often there's a lot of self-celebration for something that isn't complete and can't be complete. And there's almost a desire to slap a sticker on it and say, we've done it. Or there's the co-option of saying, well, it's a perpetual battle and we're the ones fighting it, and so we're the only ones fighting it. I think you see it in the discourse, certainly of US politics, quite openly on the surface, whichever side of the I'm an activist for this or I'm an activist for that, even on opposing sides of activists on opposing sides of the same issue. There's a lot of self-celebration. And you see it here as well, and it's a nightmare, because when you are just a person in a city like, say, Dom, this is an issue I'm sure you must have run into as an artist. We've run into it as people trying to get instruments into venues plenty of times, and I have run into it in my previous role where I was a care worker, taking a dude in a wheelchair to lots of gigs in pubs, and sometimes you're like, I don't really need a self-congratulatory sticker on the door of that venue. I need a wheelchair ramp over there. It's like that would be more useful than that sticker, and we can celebrate the ramp maybe rather than the, it's that kind of like, there's that tension always. And you're right, it's about the need to move forward and be active, not to look back at successes and just go, yeah, we're great.
It's about, from what I've got from you, what you guys are saying, a lot of the industry needs to be kind of, the curtain needs to be opened, and people need to have the balls to be like, actually, I'm not perfect. Actually, this isn't that great, and I'm just like you. It just looks like I'm doing better because I have this wonderful band photo with my nipples out, or I have this, these 100K streams, and it looks, awesome. But in fact, I'm just having a bad day like everybody else. I don't know if I've just kind of took that and turned it into something that it wasn't.
It reminds me of the conversation about aesthetics, and on the issue of, have things got better, haven't things got better, what's really going on behind it. Kallie, you were talking about how you engaged with print media and liner notes and the physical media copy in front of you. And I remember probably most of mine was done in that real transitionary, like hardcore transitionary period between people accessing print media and people using the internet. I was probably 50% of each when I was really getting into music, as opposed to more heavily weighted one or the other. As a teenager, it was, you would still go out and buy magazines, you would still go out and buy records, you would go on the internet, you do all these things, about 8 different ways of accessing it. And it was probably quite evenly weighted in a way it isn't anymore. And looking back at it, and looking back at reading Kerrang and Metal Hammer and Bizarre sometimes that did music features, and around the time I imagine, Dom, that Soundsphere was starting up a lot of this stuff, I do wonder what's behind the curtain of that I wasn't seeing as a user, in the same way that now I'm sort of saying behind the curtain of, there's loads of things that I now have access to behind the curtain of doing things now, and I'm like, wow, it's really weird back here, we should open the curtain. And then I'm kind of like, have things got worse? And this whole this tension about, the algorithms are the systems. I'm like, but maybe they would. I'm also thinking back and being like, maybe they're just as bad, if not worse, before, with the tighter curtain sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, you could, I mean, that's something that I, there are people that pay, so we have advertorials on the website, which means that I can make my, I can pay my rent. Magazines like Kerrang run off, again, advertorials and advertisements from certain bands. You can pay to have a review in Metal Hammer, or you certainly could when I was working there 10 years ago. People don't talk about that, but it's the truth. You can. People have offered me money to review things favorably. I've turned it down because it's just not my ethics. But I would understand how people would take it. You need to survive. It's a creative industry. You need to survive in it. How do you survive in it? You take whatever you can. But yes, you can. The way it worked back then, and the way it still works now, to a lesser degree, because everything's digital. But there's digital advertorial now. People can pay for, big labels pay for their artists to have that, that album artwork on the or double page spread or whatever. Not all the time. Like I say, most of the content, most of the interviews are done. The writer will be paid to do that, I would hope, in the main. But in terms of what the sort of fancy images you see, oftentimes, in terms of its album covers or whatever on magazines or whatever, that's usually paid for by the label, and because that's how these print magazines still exist. Because how and if somebody offers you money to put something up and you don't always agree with it, then you have to look at yourself and look at your values and ethics. And I know a lot of PRs that have been put in difficult situations where labels have offered them certain amounts of money and expect certain amounts of things from them, in terms of coverage and whatever. And, they've had to make difficult choices with regards to whether they, take that money and cover something that they don't agree with. A lot of times PR agencies, a lot of the people I know, for example, won't work with bands that they don't like, but some of them will, and it's where that sort of sits. And I guess I've kind of gone off topic again. You've got to kind of really look at your values and morals and go, okay, so does this sit with me? Can I do this and still maintain my integrity? But then also you can't look at it and go, well, you're a dick if you don't, because you got to pay your rent. You know what I mean? So that's me. People have to pay their rent, and the industry is run by advertorials, big labels paying for, you can pay for Spotify playlists. You can pay for reviews. You can do it. It is done. It is a regular practice.
I would say though to that, like there's an interesting place that we are right now with this, the future of music, just to make it the focus narrower, and that if we change how consumers consume music, we create better support for artists to create, live, and do more than survive. And when we do that, it's one microcosm of society, but I think there are other parts of society that are dealing with similar issues, and that's why UBI is such a big and important conversation, especially with the pandemic highlighting it. But I think when we look at, artists having agency or just making their rent, people can make better and fairer choices when they're more properly supported. And I think that, there's a lot of different ways that an artist might authentically approach this. Maybe they're comfortable with having a Patreon. Myself, for example, I wasn't comfortable with it initially, and I read Amanda Palmer's book as a primer for myself to kind of get my head into a space where I was comfortable with asking. Her book, The Art of Asking, and it was very powerful for me to think of myself a little bit differently. And I think that artists of all types, not just musicians, do carry a little bit of stigma on our backs that somehow we're not worthy of support until we're famous, or that we're not worthy of housing or food. If somebody gives me money, I better only spend it on music gear. How dare I spend it on face wash instead? It's this weird thing that artists carry with them, and like letting that stigma, depending on your society and culture, go, that you deserve a roof over your head for what you give to society and what value it has, but also that any human being, whether or not they're contributing anything at all, has a right to a safe place to live and clean water to drink, etc. I think we have to start to think, especially in the place that we are now as a planet that's on fire and flooding, how we create systems of support for everyone, but also for artists. And I think that when we go back to, the point of what Dom was talking about, like paying for things and evaluating ethics, I will be less concerned with how my rent is being paid and what ethical decisions I might have to make if the community that enjoys what I create supports that. And I think I've had some very personal journeys with that during the pandemic, and I am held accountable to the people that support me on Patreon, and just as an example of how this works for myself, but it probably is very different for other people. But like, you can make different choices as an artist or as an individual when you are given the agency to do so. And I think that really ties back into streaming, because I released new music on Friday and I had maybe 4 or 5 people buy it on Bandcamp. It was a small amount, but if I had only released it on Spotify, I would have had no amount. So the money that I earned on Friday, I bought groceries with. If it was on Spotify, I like nothing. So that's a choice that I made artistically, and because I know that's where my community is, and I know that there are people that are aligned with that. So I think as an artist, you have to know where your community is, and that can kind of, you have to know who your audience is. And that's a very tricky thing when your audience is a global thing that you're accessing through the internet.
I think in that, there's something in there about the tensions, and in a lot of this, about the tensions between institution and community, especially where, it's a music industry and musicians are inherently similar. Musicians in our current context of what it is to be a musician, most musicians, because they are someone who applies a skill, they're effectively tradespeople, people, you know, they're entrepreneurial by nature as well, because people tend to step out and say, well, I'm going to do it for myself, because it's not like there's the local orchestra, and if you want to be a musician, you just go and play the triangle in the local orchestra, and that's your job, right? Like, you know, so musicians have to be entrepreneurial. But it's interesting that the systems that we operate in, my concerns reside in the idea that the systems that we operate in, be they on the left or the right, and it's hypocritical on the right usually, the capitalist right anyway, center right, whatever you want to call it, they don't really seem to want to stimulate the same things that breed entrepreneurial spirit a lot of the time. It's very institutional. And on the left, take the American left as an example, it's the same here. It also doesn't stimulate the same entrepreneurial spirit. But you can divorce the concept of being an entrepreneur from the concept of capital and just say, be a person that goes out and does something where they can't rely on a big team of people that they're a member of, and instead they require a community to do this stuff. And I don't think that our institutions serve us well politically, socioculturally, for that community building. But I think, as you say, if you were to talk about how do you improve the music industry for users and for participants in the industry, it's all, from my mind, it's in the community building world. That's where that work has to be done. And annoyingly, well, not annoyingly, but I mean, it's up to us to do the community building, because we are the community, and the institutions aren't going to do it. They'll make better apps, you know.
And I think that's why scenes used to be so prominent too. You know, people would have a music scene. Go on, Dom.
No, you're right. I think it's kind of, we've answered our own problem, but it means more work. You know, the way for Mary and the Ram to grow, the way for you to grow is to build your own community. You have your Patreon, you know, we need to put out more music, you know, but we need to work on more stuff or whatever, you know. And I think it's building that community. I don't want to sound like a dick here, but what I'm kind of getting is that the responsibility lies with the artist. If you want to build your community, you have to put the work in to build it, because unless you have the money to do it, nobody's going to do it for you. Is that? Yeah.
That's the core of my point, I think. But
I mean, I'm gonna throw this out there that it's not, I think what the artist's job is to create, and yes, the artist has to interact with their community, but I also think that it is the consumer's responsibility to consciously consume. As an artist, need to be busy creating. I also, as an entrepreneur, need to be busy running my business and building pipeline and doing all the things that will keep me in business, AKA a roof over my head and a place with which to create. But if the community or the consumers take no responsibility in how they consume, I think it's the same relationship with food and local farming. I can't say that it's the farmer's responsibility to make sure that people eat what they've farmed. To a degree, it's the farmer's responsibility to bring it to the market and to show their offering and to communicate what they're offering. So the communication is the bridge, but the consumers have to be conscious, they have to be aware, and they have to be engaged. And that engagement goes both ways. So I don't think it's okay to just leave it at the artist's feet, because we're already overwhelmed with social
it's a very fair point.
I agree. So it's the communication. The artist can do the communication, and it's up to the respondent, the fan, the community member to respond and take up arms or whatever for the artist, basically.
I mean, there's just too much passive consumption, in my opinion, in the overall pervasive Western culture. We passively consume food, whether or not we realize how it's being brought to us or if it's any good for us. We passively consume TV shows, which may subconsciously put values in the minds of our children. And that could be spun by the right or the left. But I'm just saying, being a conscious consumer is an important part of where we are today as a planet, because we're all probably consuming more than we're outputting to some level. Some more than others. But to have that awareness of like, what am I watching? What am I reading? What am I eating? Who am I buying from? Who am I hanging out with? What am I listening to? What am I spending my precious time on this planet doing.
Yeah, and how you spend your time. Absolutely, and I think that's it's a good message. Is spend your time wisely, do shit that you love, and keep doing shit that you love, and hopefully you make some money off it. But fundamentally, do it because you believe in it, and then hopefully your community will grow. I guess if it's good, they will come. If somebody will find value in it, whether it's 5 people or 50 people or beyond that. There's still a reason to do it. There's still a point to doing it. And I think that's a message. Kiran, anything to add to that?
I was just going to say, I think you're right. About the responsibility of the artist, and I think where the weighting of that is, and I guess that the way to attempt to square that circle as an artist, I suppose, is, to my mind, is to encourage your audiences. I mean, this is like the most generic 90s person, early 2000s person answer that you can possibly give to something like this. But I think all you can do is you can encourage your audiences to question rather than just feed them stuff and hope that a few more people per gig go away with questions and continue to question the other things they do, whether that's you and your music. But to be considered or thoughtful consumers of stuff, whether it's product or whether the product isn't product because it's free, if it's just artwork, whatever. I think that's that to my mind is, I guess, the generic responsibility of the artist is to encourage people to question things.
I like that.
Whilst having feelings, but whilst having feelings.
Yeah, I mean, art, you can make art just for the sake of art, and there's no rules, right? But I think art always in all societies has had some sort of function, whether it's just to move people emotionally, to communicate something, whether that's questioning or longing or whatever, or to in some cases, America has turned advertising into an art form as well, to advertise something, which is still a form of communication and feeling, but being twisted a little bit. But at the end of the day, we as an artist, you can only hope that you move someone to think or feel something.
I think the word that bridges it is wonder, right? Because wonder is a good pun on this then, because you have a sense of wonder at things, and hopefully you wonder about things. It's thoughtfulness and feeling at the same time, right?
Absolutely. I think we've each had certainly I've been moved by Kallie's work. I've been moved by Kieran's voice. Other people I know have been moved by Kieran's voice as well as his jawline. So and obviously I've had people come up to me on stage in different countries and said, you've just inspired me, because maybe I have I've had a couple of instances, for example, if someone's got a disability so I think that fundamentally you're right. Maybe we're all sitting here going, yeah, we wish we were making more money, but actually we've all had instances, experiences you both have told me where you have impacted people, whether it's through Kieran's theatre or your production skills. We've all had moments where we've touched 1 or 2 people, and that sentence still sounds really weird to me. You know what I mean? We have touched people. We've touched a few people.
Moved them.
Maybe not an orgy of people, but we've touched some people together and individually. So I think there's something in that, if you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, absolutely. And also I think with art and moving people, it's at least for me personally, it's less about commerce, although commerce is a means to an end. Money is a solution to problems, but my greatest hope is to make more music. Like money allows me to make more music. I really don't care at the end of the day, and I will absolutely go back to sleeping on my floor if that's what it takes to make music, because that is the only thing I'm here on earth to do, and that's the only thing I really want to do, other than spend time with people I like, which sometimes involves making more music. So it's cyclical. Like I need a place to, my guitars need a home more than I do, but like really that's is that we all have to live somewhere, and we have to eat food, and like money provides the ability to get things and maintain a stable place to live. And humans have that Maslow's, hierarchy of needs, if you subscribe to that, which I think is pretty on point, unless somebody's written something recently that's been disproved and I haven't read it yet. But you know, we hope to continue to create. At least I do. I live to create, and I'm at my happiest and most well-being when I have a creative thing to do. And if someone is going to pay me for it, because it is work, I've been thinking about this a lot recently, simply because I put that new track out on Friday, and I spent 2 weeks nonstop to the point where my hands were numb because I have bad hand issues. And I just did work so hard on it. And I saw another artist had posted something about like they were having a bad day. And, you know, the artist had spoken about how they were having a bad day, and they'd done like 1 million takes of something. And it's like, it is, what we do is hard work. And I think just because what we create is enjoyable doesn't mean that it's not work and that we don't deserve compensation. And I think that's always such a tricky line to walk, because you don't want to seem like it's like you're greedy, but it's also that you're like, oh, I love what I do so much, I'll do it for free. That's not, that's not what's being said.
it's not sustainable in the ecosystem that we all exist in. It's not sustainable to say I'll do it for free. It would be nice that if that was the case and life was sustainable anyway, but then, I absolutely agree with you. We have to buy gear.
Yeah, if my landlord needed a theme song and they were willing to exchange a month's rent for a theme, then that's fine. I will write them a theme song for whatever their hike or their, but we just don't, that's not how our world operates. Yeah. So I can't do that for them.
Yeah, and I think it would be it's disingenuous to not that any of us are, but you do occasionally hear people sort of pushing the narrative that it's disingenuous to have the kind of opinions that you've just stated, which I 100% agree with you that is just the way it is. And in the paradigm that we're in, that's how you have to work. And I don't think anyone should be bothered about that, because it doesn't mean that you can't work to improve the paradigm, but
yeah, exactly. And that's the, that's where we are today, I think, globally, that there's a lot. Yeah.
I mean, we are coming to probably the back end, and we've just been talking about all of our what we do. You've not told us what your latest track is that you've put out. You've not told us all this stuff yet. So throw it in. Tell us what, if we've got people who because some people who are watching this will know you already. I'm sure there'll be people from the community that Dom and I interface with who already know you and have probably already listened to it. I listened to your new stuff like a couple of, I think the morning you dropped it anyway. It was morning here anyway, and it came up on social media, and I accessed it from there. It was great. I went on Bandcamp and listened to it.
Nice, thank you.
There will be people who don't know you as well, I think, who'll interface with this. So tell us what it is. Where would you like them to go to access your stuff, and what is it you'd like them to access?
Well, there's a lot of things to access. It depends on where they like to go. I think Bandcamp is a great place to start. I have 2 catalogs on Bandcamp, Kallie Marie, which is all of my solo instrumental type stuff. And then I have Explosives for Her Majesty, which is more of a revolving door studio project that is a more traditional band format. And there's a different lineup of musicians for each record. And but beyond that, I guess if you are addicted to Spotify, Explosives for Her Majesty is on Spotify. So feel free to stream and playlist that till your heart's content. I also have both of my catalogs on Apple Music, and I guess I don't know who uses what, but this is, the internet era. So anyone, anywhere could hear that. There's Deezer and Tidal and Amazon. So you can find the music there, but my music is not on YouTube at all. And if you find it there, tell me, because I've been sending around lots of takedown orders. If you want to be involved in the nitty gritty of what I do, I have a Patreon. So people are welcome to check that out. There's a lot of behind the scenes stuff, little demo things. You get to hear music in early stages, or sometimes I do little video posts. I want to start doing more live streams of when I'm working, but when I'm under pressure, I don't work well with the camera. I'm trying to think of anywhere else. I mean, if you want to interact with me on social media, I'm on Twitter, perhaps too much. But I'm there and I will talk to strangers. So I've made many friends that way. And the single that I put out last week is just a radio edit and an extended version of an electronic track. And I may use it as a demo for new Explosives for Her Majesty material, which I'm trying to get going again. I originally, at the beginning of COVID, had this intention of doing so. And then, you know, as many people were kind of rerouted during that time. So yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to creating more music for Explosives for Her Majesty. I'm actively reaching out to people to collaborate with and interested in hearing from people who want to collaborate. And I think that's all the facets and hats that I can think of. Oh yes, and I have a website, which is just my name at .com. And people are welcome to reach out to me there for, you know, you want to work with me as a producer, or you have something that you need music for, whether it's an app, a game, a film, a roller coaster, your own theme song. I mean, I'm open to writing music for anything and everything. So that's a good place to drop me a line there and check out more of my work.
That's fantastic. I'm glad you touched on the if people wanted to interact with you professionally at the end, because I was going to ask you. I thought you were going to skip over it, and I was like, well, loads of people we know might actually want to talk to a producer who we trust, and as opposed to someone they've found randomly. I think this is the thing: networks and community, man.
Yeah,
you know, we can recommend working with you.
I appreciate that.
You know, your advice is really, it works for the way that I worked anyway. And there are lots of people who work in the way that I do. So,
great.
So yeah. You know, so I would also say to anyone that's watching it, watching this, if you're looking for advice, about the sonics, you know, of your work, get in touch with Kallie, you know. So,
thank you. Thank you.
And I think that probably is, if anyone's still watching at this point, that's great. I hope they are. I think our last one went pretty well. I think this one's gone really well. I'm really enjoying this. This is a lovely format to work in. So
it is.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Kallie, and it's been a pleasure, because obviously you're a friend as well as a work colleague and collaborator. So it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to have you on this podcasty type thing. And I guess we'll see you on the other side when I come back to the US, or Kiran visits with me, or whatever. We'll think, or you come
or I come over there.
Or you come here.
Well, you of course have a huge history in Yorkshire, so you know you're and if you want to know more about that, because we haven't covered that, you can find Kallie as Doom Golly on Twitter, and you can, because she will talk to strangers about Yorkshire and everything else.
And all of it's wonderful tea.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Kallie. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Kiran. And
we'll
see you soon.
All right.
See you all soon.